Do automated systems, tools, and processes play a central role in the daily workflow and overarching philosophy of your organization? We often encapsulate this concept with the phrase automation culture, which admittedly might sound a bit highbrow than simply saying we automate everything we can. Yet the word culture does embody this depth of integration as well as the strategic intent behind the use of automation. The WWT research report Automation Priorities covers 5 interdependent priorities crucial for today's technological landscape. Now, we've already explored the first 3 in our series. First one, drive a top-down automation strategy, where we emphasize the importance of leadership in steering the automation journey of an organization. And then number 2, very, very important, invest in observability, the need to implement systems that allow for comprehensive monitoring and understanding of an IT environment. And then kind of in a contrast to number 1, we've got number 3, scale grassroots efforts, highlighting how individual and small team initiatives can be expanded for company-wide solutions. Now, a recurring element woven into each aspect or each show has been culture. Once an idea becomes woven into the tapestry of your culture, it is embedded for the long term. Now, to proclaim that we've fostered a culture of automation is to acknowledge the zenith of enduring advantages. It's an all-encompassing benefit that it touches everyone in the organization, from team members on the ground all the way through to executives and investors, provided you do it right, of course. In today's episode, we turn our focus to the final 2 priorities, critical components that complete the blueprint for successful integration of technology within an organization. Priority 4, adopt a people-first approach. We discuss the importance of centering the human element in the midst of technological advancement. We're also going to explore strategies for ensuring that as we automate and innovate, as we also uplift, train, and empower our workforce. Now, the 5th and final priority, also included in today's show, don't forget about governance. It's essential to remember that with the power of technology comes the need for oversight, responsible use, and not to mention compliance. We'll break down the complexities of governance, outlining how organizations can maintain control and visibility over their automated processes to ensure long-term success, and that's key. That brings us back to culture and how we can bake automation into your culture. As we've done throughout the series, we have 2 WWT leaders representing different but complementary functions. Mark Wall serves as Director of Automation Solutions and Consulting. Together with his team, he collaborates closely with clients to identify their objectives as well as guide the allocation of resources to meet those goals. And then Kevin Dana, who holds a position VP of Information Security and IT Technology. For technology, his role, which might parallel yours, involves the management of systems and processes within WWT's IT department. Successful automation doesn't merely focus on technical implementations, but requires a deep understanding and consideration of cultural shifts. So join us as we unpack these priorities, offering insights and wisdom on how to effectively bring them to life within your organization. Welcome to WWT Research, insights powered by the Advanced Technology Center. All right, well, Mark Wall, Kevin Dana, make sure I got all the names right and I didn't reverse anything here. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I wonder if we'll start with Mark and you get some colloquial definitions of how do you explain what you do for Worldwide Technology?
Yeah, no, thanks, Rob. So my name's Mark Wall. I look after the automation consulting and services side here. And really, to kind of summarize it, we help customers really transform their organization through culture, or automation, driving even new culture and creating excitement right in their environments, removing toil, and really kind of summarize it, helping shifting from operating to really innovating and kind of create some energy and kind of where they're going. So appreciate you having me here.
Absolutely. And so you do a lot of focus on automation. I'm sure it's not the only thing. It tends to require a lot of other disciplines, but we'll get into more of that. Kevin, do you mind telling us, how do you explain what you do for Worldwide Technology?
Sure. I lead the internal IT organization and the information security organization. So essentially the technology and the enablement for the business that of WWT internally is ultimately my responsibility, as well as the security, making sure that everything is locked down and operating well is ultimately what I'm responsible for.
Well, and I love talking about security, but we're going to have to avoid that one because it's endless in terms of how far we could go with it. But let's just say for the sake of this recording that security is important. Please do it. And we'll move on from there. Speaking about automation. So here, let me raise this question, and I'll let Mark, you answer this, but either of you jump in on it. I want to talk about culture. The title of the show, we talk about culture, baking automation into your culture, culture in your automation. Why is automation part of something that I tend to associate with minimization of human involvement? It seems like a disconnect, but perhaps not. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just how do you reignite a passion, right? How do you maximize when people show up to work every day? They're excited. A big way that we do that is through automation. So removing mundane tasks or toil that allow, hey, I gotta do this, then click this, then do this, then copy this, and do this. If I can automate that, that'll allow me to sort of spend less time on the operational, the mundane things, copying files, doing sort of ad hoc things to more exciting things, new initiatives. So really the idea is how do we get people excited, with people continuing to come back to work and even working remotely in this hybrid work environment. How do we maximize the time and energy people spend and really get them excited? So really the idea is it's not taking away anybody's job or livelihood, but it's really asking, how do you put a jetpack on when you're showing up to work, or one of those exosuits when they're like lifting the heavy boxes and things like that? So you're still doing a lot of the same type of work, but the more strategic, the more exciting things, and making the mundane sort of go away.
Well, let me try this and I bring Kevin in on this, but I feel like culture may be part of the answer in terms of, because everything you just described isn't always exciting to people, especially at first. And when you're talking about changes across an entire organization, that fear of change, change management and all the things that go into that psychology, does culture play a part in kind of helping overcome any potential challenges there?
I would jump in and I'd say, first, is from a worldwide perspective, one of our core values is embrace change. And not every company necessarily has that, although I think most would espouse that that's something that they'd want. But to that point that you raised, Rob, people tend to like to get into particular habits or master a particular space. And so when somebody comes in and says, we're going to disrupt that by automating that, you're going to find probably a little bit of a split of the people that get excited about that and can see the opportunity, and the people that feel threatened by that. Because especially with the rest of the world always in a constant state of flux, there's something that's a little unsettling. So the aspect culturally to, hey, we're here to help. We understand that this could be disruptive. We're going to help minimize that disruption and provide you with opportunities, and in the process, potentially make your job easier or find new ways to do different things as well. It's not going to be easy for sure. And again, there's going to be a lot of engagement that needs to be had to help kind of ease people through that transition.
Yeah, and I feel like when you say culture, also it's a little bit of moving past that notion of what you kind of alluded to there, which is lip service. Do we say that we are very change oriented versus are we really like that? And you can say it at a company level. Obviously, individually, I think it's going to vary, depend on their management, depend on their history, their self-esteem in that role, whatever it may be at an individual level. But I'm curious while you've got the microphone, in your experience, what kind of things do you think help get people on board with these kind of changes?
I think showing them the art of the possible, demonstrating some of those things so they can actually see it. I mean, if you're describing something conceptually, it still seems very opaque and I guess to that end scary. But if you could say, hey, this is what this would look like, and this is what it looks like for you, and then also giving some time and space for questions, answers, not just, like an hour, but a couple of different sessions so people can process things. Maybe even, if possible, with some of those demos or proofs of concepts, is enable them to get their hands on it so they can see that they have an opportunity to help shape where those things go, because that's ultimately where some of these disruptions play into the opportunity, is when people can see that I might be disrupted, but I now have an opportunity to help shape, as opposed to I'm being displaced and now I have to go find something else to do. That's where the value prop comes in that could get the hook into the hearts and minds of people around why this is something they want to be a part of.
It's almost like, one for the company, one for you, right? What are the 5 things you hate doing on a daily basis? How can we make your life a little bit easier? In addition, here's how embracing this, expenses. I loathe expenses. I travel quite a bit. Graciously, Kevin's team came up with some new tooling and kind of some automation, a couple years ago to kind of, be able to make that easier. At first I was like, who moved my cheese? And then I was like, well, actually it makes my life a lot easier. And when they rolled out new tooling and technology, I was much more able. So kind of that, hey, what are the things that really sort of create a bad taste in the employees and the folks' mindset, and that'll sort of help them, cross that chasm, cross that bridge into more adopting some new ways of driving change as well.
Well, and I hear both of you saying this notion of kind of sharing. Well, what's the end result of what we're asking you to do, and kind of engaging people in the process sounds important. So when you contribute to this, when we start thinking in this manner, which to me is the cultural transition, is that we start thinking automation first when it comes to new processes. At some point you get beyond the things are constantly being added, of course. How do we do those things in such a way that's not like we used to add them on? So I like that. In the paper, in the research paper that we were basing this off of, there was a notion in terms of bridging the gap between people, is the importance of getting both generalists from a knowledge perspective as well as specialists. You're nodding your head. Do you mind jumping in on that one and kind of explain what's important there?
Yeah, I think like anything, there's going to be, there was an old, friend named Joe King who kind of came up with a lot of this, who's still kind of in the industry. But you got to think about personas, like who's consuming this? Am I going to be someone that's consuming automation and being able to do that as part of my job? Do I need to be maybe consuming automation and being able to tweak it slightly to where I go from pushing the button to like slightly changing the button to add some, additional features or functionality? Or am I going to be someone maybe building buttons for other people? And I think it's important to understand is like, as we go forward with automation and now AI and data and ML and all these type of things, you don't have to be a full blown, rocket scientist and learn how to program and do all these crazy things. But it's probably important to understand a bit of a concept of, how do I consume this, and a little bit of maybe how I tweak some things. So if you're bringing different teams together, how do I bring in people that maybe can kind of write the code a little bit, but also people that are going to consume it, and start mixing those folks together to kind of create some synergy and some alignment. Otherwise, you may have a skew viewed on, hey, this is the best way to build it. But if someone can't consume it in a certain way, it's really probably not going to make that much of a difference. So we kind of have to blend both of those together.
That's a great point. And I'm curious, Kevin, from your overview, this also seems like and we talked about this in previous shows, so it's not like anything new here, but really successful system-wide or company-wide automation involves bridging multiple silos. So you've got people who may not have always spoken or understand what each other does. Suddenly becomes important to automate the really critical processes that are going to drop benefits to the bottom line. Is that your experience? Am I stating that right? And any pointers on engaging people from that perspective?
Yeah, I guess I'd say, in the traditional engagement of IT with business stakeholders, usually they are within those individual departments. And so then the parts in between are the ones that we often find is where employees, team members make do. And so they start to create ad hoc manual things, whether it be email or, screen scrape or Excel spreadsheets or whatnot. So those are really prime areas. But the other thing I might add in there is if you could couch it as process improvement first, of taking the step back with both sets of team members to say, hey, we're looking for how do we actually make the flow of information and the flow of work more optimized, then it gives an opportunity for us to first and foremost see, are there ways that we can make this happen in the most beneficial way for both departments and ultimately for the customer, and then start to look at where are the opportunities to add in automation. So there's a means of kind of framing that in a way that is less concerning for them, of like, we're here to take your job, to we're here to optimize the process and make it easier for you to work with this other group, and we're going to make that happen A to B or A to Z in the end here. And that just helps make sure that we're not automating bad processes that have just happened to crop up over time.
I remember talking to a few different people in the supply chain stuff that you guys have been through in terms of automating that and bringing in not just internal silos that have to communicate differently, but also recognizing the partners that you partner with and how that information comes in, and potentially asking your partners to work with you in different ways, because so many manual processes suddenly get exposed and become that bottleneck that can affect what would otherwise be a pristine and smooth process. Yeah, so I know you guys have some experience in doing these kind of things in multiple places. And Kevin, sticking with you for just a second, you mentioned productization, and then I've seen that come back up in the piece here. I'll get you both to talk about this, but what does that mean, and how does it help maintain perhaps processes that have been set up?
Well, the term productization or product, when we look at it from an IT standpoint, we really do want to look at any solution that we produce as a product. And the reason we do that is because if you treat it as a technology solution and the requirements, et cetera, you can lose sight of the overarching outcomes that you're trying to achieve. And then also with that, some of the aspects of how much does it cost and the benefits, et cetera. So I'd say that the thing that we'd look at here is left to their own devices. If we just said, let's automate things, we could end up with everybody going out and by their own means come up with multiple different ways of achieving those goals, which could be good. But there are nuances. Well, there's security considerations, as you know.
Yeah.
There are nuances to the way and the art of using those particular tools that you often need to learn in each of those things. And then ultimately, once those things are set up, there's the operational aspects that you want to make sure that it's continuing to operate smoothly and not misperform or underperform. So what you want to do when that means from a product standpoint is really say, what are the right product or platforms that you want to use from an automation standpoint? How do we get those set up so that there's the right level of IT support for the core or the foundational pieces, and then enable the right business users and or technical automation users partnering together to actually start building the automations in there. So it enables us to focus our efforts in the right places versus basically dispersing all of our attention to a bunch of different tools, and then we're expending much more effort than we should in order to achieve the same types of outcomes.
I always give the example of it's like adopting, six Great Dane puppies. You're like, oh, they're cute, and then they grow up, and you're like, oh my gosh, how much am I spending on food? I gotta walk them now. I gotta ride them when I'm at the park. Basically, they see a squirrel, So it gets exciting, but to Kevin's point, right? It gets a little. How do you support that, and how do you maintain that? And as people move on and get promoted or sort of move within the organization, how do I ensure that when new people come on to be able to support that or extend capabilities, I have sort of a streamlined way of doing that, and I'm not starting from scratch. And I think it's a delicate balance of embracing innovation and creating excitement with also a little bit of how do I put some sort of mindset of how am I going to support this from a product standpoint a little bit longer term as well.
Yeah, I like the idea. It reminds me too of just basically developing a menu that says, hey, we've got all these things that you can do, which sometimes can help lead people who are like, if you just told them, hey, we want you to automate everything, it's a whole lot easier to say, hey, here's 10 things that are kind of associated with your function. You could choose any one of them, and and if it's really advanced, here's the cost to your department if there's any. Here's the IT resources used. Whatever all the ongoing things that we're doing nowadays. And I feel like everything in this show today is really about how do we have some type of longevity, because I've been a part of many companies and many operations where we start really aggressively and excited and everybody's on board, and then we lose interest in a quarter generally at publicly held companies. It gets hard to maintain things over the time frame when you talk about a true innovation that's going to be sustainable, become part of the culture, if you will. And while you're still on that, it brings us to governance, I think, because I look at my understanding of governance has to do with kind of setting up the fact that this is a circular process, that something has to be fed to maintain and continue to build on for the future. Mark, how would you speak to governance, and what's the importance of establishing that?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of going back to that fine line. How do you put for those of you that have gone bowling, I'm horrible at bowling. However, I enjoy doing it.
It's fun.
So hey, pull up the bumpers.
You can drink at the same time. I like that. Yeah,
37 with bumpers, no big deal. So really the idea is how do I maximize what I'm doing within sort of some guidelines or some guardrails, right, at the end of the day. So it's, you want to create that excitement and create that energy. We just want to say, yeah, here's kind of a framework to get you started. Here's some examples sort of, use cases or outcomes that you can apply to your jobs or your roles, and then try to figure out like how do you get a group of people, not in the thou shall do XYZ, but start developing some level of board or kind of governance team, if nothing else, to just say, hey, I've been there, I've touched the stove. Here's a couple suggestions. Here's a couple things. So we're not sort of uncovering things and looking for the treasure map from day one. But I think making sure you kind of give them a head start, removing that barrier to entry, as also, again, establishing that little bit of a governance board just to kind of help make sure we get input from the various folks and the various teams throughout the organization. And it's not to say you can or can't do anything. It's just to kind of help, kind of polish out and make people a lot more efficient at where we're going.
Who do you want on a governance board in an ideal situation? Who needs to be involved?
Anybody that you can bribe as, lunches, Starbucks gift cards. No, and I think really the idea is just, definitely some level of security, Kevin, but really the idea is like, how do you get input from the various stakeholders, right? Within the business side, the technical side, and making sure you have the right level of alignment between where the organization's trying to go, as well as some of the individual teams that are going to consume it, and making sure you're kind of balancing in what's that overall corporate strategy with sort of the individual components, to making sure it's not just some pie in the sky effort, but really anybody that's sort of in between, as Kevin said earlier, what is that process or that workflow? What are the things that I'm ultimately trying to create efficiency on, and make sure you have some level of representation for those areas. But I'd be curious, sort of, Kevin, within internal worldwide IT and security, what's that look like for you guys?
I'd say the governance has two phases to its life, which may mean that the governance board may shift over time. So in the beginning, like we talked about earlier, there's probably going to be more of the resistance to change that we need to get over. So at that point, I think the governance is largely going to need to be made up of executive stakeholders that are bought into, we need to do this, and help to present more of that leadership, for lack of a better term, mandate or pressure that says we're going to do this. And so at that point in time, there's going to be a lot more of the how are we automating type of discussion that's happening. So it's, like I said, what tool or tools are we picking? What processes are we going to start with, and how do we show benefit for those? Then that's when that flywheel starts to pick up, and it starts to be less about what we're doing or how we're doing it, and into what we're doing. And at that point, largely the governance becomes very similar to the governance that we have for the rest of our IT, where we always have more demand than we have capacity. So it's then having the right stakeholders kind of rank ordering where are we going to get the biggest bang for our buck, so that we can pick those things and work those things through. And so there you can start to blend a little bit. It's still going to need to be oriented around that specific set of capacity, because they're still usually in a center of excellence type of model. We're not necessarily distributing out automation skills and capabilities to every single portfolio versus feeding those into a specialized group that can help work those things through. So I'd say it's kind of a two-phase governance, and it starts with that executive mandate kind of push, and then it transitions to more of a steady state of how are we prioritizing which things are running through that automation pipeline.
Well, one thing you're saying there that I think is important to call out is you're saying it changes over time, and that as this is something I pick up from you guys, but as we progress along this maturity curve, the needs and thus the requirements of what that group is doing for the company are going to change over time, and they should change over time. Because I'm also always fascinated by the fact that sometimes we tackle things that seem so hairy and hard and just got to keep pushing through it. But then when you nail it, you begin going, wow, it's like taking the blue pill. There's this whole new, was it the blue pill yeah, I think it was the blue pill. This whole thing, I'm just totally
just
calling out.
Just don't take pills that they offer you randomly, Rob. That's
yes.
fine.
Okay. No, I've learned that one the hard way. I just can't remember my movie references correctly. But it needs to change as you mature and opens up new possibilities. And with that end, I would think, this feels kind of cheesy, but I almost feel like governance may never go away in terms of a function. I feel like in a long run, in a really mature organization, it certainly doesn't have to have as much priority. There's probably other centers of excellence, other things that you're tackling, but at this, because you almost move towards this automating of your governance. Because if it's truly indeed part of your culture, I would think, then that means, well, you're probably not needing to stoke it as much and poke the fire, so to speak, to keep the candles burning. Am I saying that okay?
It is. I'd say maybe to expand on that a little bit, or at least I think it takes on other facets. There's an automation COE or hub, and earlier on, it was about things like robotic process automation or low code processes. Those have shifted from the how we're doing it to what we're doing, but now we're looking at some of the things more around ML or generative AI, and we're working through proof of concept. Not all the same people necessarily, certainly same types of stakeholders, but as far as the technology teams that are working on those things, but it's still being couched as automation. It's just different types of automation.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So instead of spinning up all these different governance groups, which governance can get a bad rap for kind of the bureaucracy there, but if you can figure out how to do efficient governance by kind of keeping things in a like pattern and then feeding them through, then you actually can gain more throughput in these concepts, even though you might be applying it with different things. So they're like, well, this sounds different, and it's like it is different technology wise, but the principles are still the same. We're taking the toil out of the day-to-day work and making it more efficient.
Yeah. And maybe Rob, just to kind of chime in a little bit, I took one for the team and went to a really nice customer advisory event in Miami a month ago. So, cold
That's
Colorado.
Big of you. Yeah.
I know. I'm great.
But you're leaving Colorado. I'm like, well, that's a contrast, but I'd go for either.
From snow to warm, sunny beaches and everything. But a big initiative there. Our CEO, Jim Cavanaugh, and executive leadership were there. We were really there to talk about and hear insights from our clients' leadership. This was kind of more the financial space, but AI is everywhere and a huge initiative. And it was spot on with what Kevin was saying was we're looking at leveraging even more automation to get rid of the toil and free people up to move towards driving more AI and ML. And it's that kind of evolution. So what we're seeing is they're pouring, call it more gas onto automating to free up the operational components to more innovation, AI, working with the different business units, having IT branch out more into marketing, to sales, next best offer, marketing, lead generate, a lot of these type of things. So I think it's kind of twofold. It's like, how do we do more automation to get out of the regulatory hurdles from security and compliance, and then calm that down, and then really go big into AIs. Yeah. Additionally, as we talked about with governance, same thing. Shifting that governance model, say, we're pretty good with automation. And as this sort of evolves and sort of turns, it's coming into more this AI, this ML driven decision making. So it's kind of a very interesting parallel of what we're seeing with our clients, as well as what we're also doing internally with kind of the evolution of everything going on in the industry.
Well, I like that connection you made to security as well, because I think one of the biggest things, security, we often get wrapped around looking at fancy attacks and big complicated things. And a lot of times it simply boils down to social engineering or just mistakes. And a lot of those mistakes are because people are doing something that's very manual, but yet it feeds into another system of processes behind it. And one mistake can then ripple. And so if we can automate that, we also lower the degree of risk that we're potentially opening ourselves up to, I feel like, because we said, this is the right way to do it. Let's quit thinking about it and let's put our thinking into something else. Now we got a culture. Something to that effect.
Absolutely. But it benefits from a security standpoint, and the other one it benefits is typically around data and making sure the data is cleaner. At least there's still going to be some aspects of dirty, but the part of it's not being pulled from one place, done something, somebody's handling it and then putting it somewhere else. You're controlling it end to end. So it just helps with a lot of the other things that we want to accomplish from a overall enterprise architecture standpoint as well.
And I'm just trying to validate your position. So I say, security, see, it all works together. There's a big reason. You're not here just because you're smart. Well, one of my favorite parts of all of the research papers, because there's kind of a consistent layout that they usually do. And one of them is measures of success is kind of a component that's always in here. And I'll just ask openly, doesn't matter what we actually said in the paper, but Mark, start with you, but both of you weigh in. What kind of things would we say, if you're doing these things, if we see this happening, you're on the right track or you've succeeded, however you would phrase it?
Yeah, and I would say there's sort of the typical, time aspect, right? So maybe there's not hard savings, but there's soft savings. What is my time to be able to, provide a service? Additionally, cost of scale. So, hey, I got 87 widgets I'm providing service for. If I go to 400 widgets, I should be able to scale more efficiently. So I don't, 1+1=3. So as I grow my services, my applications, I don't need as, much, call it a additional overhead or cost to be able to grow the organization. I think another one that's missed is sort of compliance and audit and remediation. We're seeing a lot of these, metrics of how much, how much more successful am I from an audit standpoint to getting dinged that I missed something. Again, if I'm proactively automating, I'm reducing that risk of human error, remediation. And I think probably the biggest one we're starting to see now, we met with a client in New York not too long ago, is employee satisfaction. So that's the thing they're starting to really think about is how can I provide tooling and automation to make sure it's a great place to work, to attract talent, as well as to maximize that and increasing that employee satisfaction. We're seeing AI and automation and some of these other things as truly a differentiator to attract talent from a recruiting standpoint as well. So kind of that employee satisfaction is sort of another metric where I don't think everybody's cracked it perfectly yet, but we're starting to see that sort of bubble up into how we're measuring automation at some of our clients.
Kevin, your comments on what you see as success metrics. I would assume the basics are you have a governance board that pretty seems binary. You either have one or you don't, and you're kind of focused in that area, taking it seriously. I don't know. What else would you cite?
I'd say one of the signs we did touch on it a little bit is if you see your governance change from the one around it, the executive, we're doing this, to what are we doing? I think that's a good indicator. And I'd say kind of anecdotally, we've seen that. We've got some automation built into the month-end financial month-end close process, and when we had a particular issue a few months ago with something, it was the finance team that said, we need you to help us spin up a particular type of automation so that we can quickly, make a certain type of adjustment. So it was the business saying, I need help with this in order to make that process work. So to me, that's an external indicator that that it's been internalized as a particular type of product or service offering that they know about and need and we can help with. So I'd say those are fundamental to the way that these things that the way that we implement these things.
You're
I'd say
making
the other thing I would add is it kind of goes back to, again, the aspect of a growth mindset from a company standpoint. You want to attract and retain, as Mark was saying, we want to attract and retain people that are seeking to help grow a business. So it kind of goes back to that fundamental conversation we had, is when you engage with an organization and you feel, and you're saying we're going to help in the growth by taking the toil out. That helps us also determine, are we getting folks that are grabbing a hold of that opportunity and then helping, or are we getting people that are resistant to that? And certainly we hope that with the ones that are resistant, back to the cultural thing, that we can explain the reason why and help get them on board for those things and find that opportunity. But ultimately, there's an aspect of that that's for the health of the overall company that will see overall benefit from these types of initiatives, because it's all about continuing to root out the toil and make sure that we're doing value-added things and creating a better overall employee and customer experience in the end.
I got it. I'm going to have you close your ears for just a moment and ask Mark a question that I don't want you to hear the answer to.
Okay.
Mark, put your hands on your ears?
Right.
At least play along. Mark, do you, from your perspective, are you guys an automation culture? Do you have a culture of automation?
At Worldwide?
Yes.
What's funny? Some of the best, and Kevin did not pay me. He didn't pay me that much. Let's be honest. But no, he didn't pay me.
Never enough.
To say this, one of the best success stories we have, I kid you not, is Worldwide IT. So just the culture of building it from the ground up, just the way that we're trying to do this. What I will say, and Kevin knows this, what we're also seeing is the success that we've seen in IT. Now we're embracing it in other areas. So as an example, the reason Kevin and I know each other, and Kevin loves me, but also hates me sometimes as well, is we come up with these new innovative ideas of like, how can we help our clients drive an outcome? Yeah. But it needs to be fully integrated into Worldwide IT and secure and all these other things.
How hard could that be?
The idea of like, how do we have bumpers and guardrails? And Kevin's been a great mentor and coach to say, like, that's great, Mark. However, we need to, like, what's the long-term plan? You're adopting a bunch of Greyhound or, Great Dane puppies. But I do think that we're seeing success. And then now, and Kevin knows this, with this whole AI initiative from our CEO down, of just, how can we leverage generative AI? How can we leverage more and more of that? I think it's spurring, and Kevin would love your honest feedback as well. I feel like that's completely reigniting the drive to think more creative and, like, how do we do, more with less so we can scale in that sort of growth mindset.
Kevin?
Well, I'd pull one other metaphor and say I just want to get that bowling ball and throw it at Mark. But aside from that, yes, I think that it does reignite a lot, and it is one of those things. Gen AI is a whole different podcast, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But with automation, there's these waves, right? And so each of these waves produces, or at least provides, the opportunity to introduce energy into your environment that helps to, further a lot of these things. And to that effect, like we talked about, there's a lot that automation enables us to do beyond the traditional kind of enterprise technology architecture that we lay out. And so it's just another layer that helps to create a more fully digitized environment for the business. And then as we add in some of these other capabilities, Gen AI in particular, but Gen AI in the context of automation, I think will be a pretty interesting aspect, because we're taking out some of the toil that's very procedural. Mm-hmm. Now you're going to be able to introduce some things that help with some of that fuzzier logic that needs to be applied. You're still going to always need a human in the middle, or a human in the loop of all those things. So it's not that those jobs are going away. It's just changing the nature of those jobs.
It's inevitable. Yeah, absolutely. And there's got to be a reason why you guys, I don't remember exactly what the award's called, but I think you've won Best Place to Work or something every single year. And you guys have been around, 30 years? Is that about right? Mm-hmm. For worldwide? Mm-hmm. Somewhere around there. At least 25 plus, I know. What does WWT do to help customers kind of bridge this, no matter what their maturity level is in the concept of automation?
Yeah, I think what we're really good at, and what we try to strive, is we want to meet clients where they're at, right? Whether you're advanced and you need some capacity or scale, or you're getting started and you need help with, creating an actionable roadmap and a plan and setting up that automation factory, and maybe, not having to start from scratch. So really what I would say is, no matter where you're at, whether you're just starting your journey, you need a plan, what's governance look like, what are some low-hanging use cases, or, hey, we've touched the stove 25 times. Here's where is a good idea, but I'd be real careful. We're happy to help get started. But also at the same time, it's not just doing work for you, but it's doing work with you. So really enabling, doing co-development, some of those type of things is really where we try to focus to make sure there's long-term sustainability. So meeting you where you're at and working together to drive a larger outcome.
Mark, thank you so much.
Rob, appreciate the time. Thanks for having me.
Kevin, thank you as well.
Been my pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Modern business transformation hinges on the dynamic relationship between automation and culture. Success in automation extends beyond technology. It necessitates a cultural shift where a people-first mentality is key, helping ease fears around job displacement, for instance. Effective collaboration and the preservation of institutional knowledge is all critical for integrating automation. And governance, also crucial, requiring a board that represents all stakeholders and stays responsive to the changes. The impact of automation is measurable through increased team engagement, improved services, and quicker delivery times. I encourage you to consume these previous episodes we talked about earlier as soon as you can. But at the very least, please go to the source and read this report directly. Automation Priorities, a roadmap for delivering enterprise-wide automation at scale. My name is Rob Boyd. Thank you for joining us.